He didn't expect the dirt road to feel so long. 7 years away from this farm, and suddenly every turn felt like a question he wasn't ready to answer. The once familiar white fences were chipped, the mailbox half-tilted. But the memories, those were untouched. Daniel Hayes, millionaire, CEO, the kind of man magazines call self-made. But right now, in his luxury car coated with country dust, he didn't feel made at all. He felt unmade. He had told himself this was just a detour, a quick visit to check on something. But deep down, he knew. This wasn't about the land. It was about her, Emma, the woman he left behind when ambition felt like oxygen. She once said, "You can't build happiness out of money, Daniel." He laughed then. Now the echo of that laugh burned worse than regret. When he finally pulled into the driveway, the place looked smaller, like time had quietly folded in on itself. The barn door creaked in the same way it used to when they'd argue, then make up over coffee at sunrise. He stepped out, brushing his jacket like he could shake off the guilt. And that's when he saw her. At a distance, by the garden, kneeling, hair tied up, hands covered in soil, like the world had moved on without him. He almost called her name. Almost. Then he froze. Because she wasn't alone. A young boy, no older than 6, ran toward her laughing. A laugh Daniel swore he had heard before. Same dimple, same eyes. His eyes. For a man who had conquered boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, Daniel had never felt smaller. His pulse tightened. His throat went dry. Suddenly, every speech about winning felt meaningless. And here's the irony. 7 years ago, he left this farm believing love held him back. Now, standing on the same dirt, love was the only thing that could break him. But don't get it twisted. This isn't the story of a man who lost everything. It's the story of how a man finally understood what everything meant. You want to know how Daniel Hayes went from a farm boy to a millionaire, and what brought him crawling back to the place he abandoned? Let's rewind. Before the fame, before the fortune, before the farm. Welcome, story lovers. From where are you watching? Drop your city name in the comments. Let's see how far our story travels. Emma hadn't always belonged to dirt roads and rusted fences. Once, she dreamed in colors too bright for a small-town sky. Born to a schoolteacher mother and a father who fixed tractors for a living, Emma grew up with calloused hands and a mind that refused to settle. Her mom used to say, "We can't choose our roots, but we can choose what we grow into." And Emma believed it. In high school, she was that girl everyone said would go places. Top of her class. Full scholarship to study agricultural science, a dream she carried like a lantern. She didn't want to leave her hometown forever, just long enough to bring back something better. She wanted to show that the same land her father plowed could one day bloom because of her knowledge. Not luck. Then came Daniel. He wasn't from money either. But he carried himself like he was already halfway there. Smart, restless, charming. The kind of man who could sell a dream to someone who already had one. They met at a town fundraiser, both talking about how they'd change their lives someday. At first, they were unstoppable together. She dreamed of improving the soil. He dreamed of building an empire. She saw roots. He saw wings, and for a while both believed they could have both. They married young, full of promise and purpose. Daniel started his small trading business. Emma worked part-time at a local seed company while finishing her degree. Their kitchen smelled of instant coffee and plans. Every night, they'd sit under the old porch light, mapping futures that seemed so certain. But success, as they learned, doesn't always arrive quietly. When Daniel's business started to grow, so did his hunger for more. Investors came knocking, offering him partnerships that would require long absences, late nights, and eventually, a move to the city. Emma hesitated. The farm was her soul. The city, his dream. At first, love won. Then ambition started keeping score. Daniel began spending weeks away, chasing deals, chasing recognition. Emma stayed back, believing she was holding down the fort until he came home for good. She managed the house, the bills, the fading warmth of a marriage, stretched by distance. Then came the storm. The company Daniel had built from scratch collapsed under an investor's betrayal. Debt collectors started calling. They sold everything except the small farmhouse her father had left her. For a moment, she thought maybe this was life's way of slowing them down, bringing them back to what mattered. But Daniel saw it differently. He blamed the smallness of the farm, the town, even her contentment. He said, "I can't rebuild my life here, Emma. This place is poison." And one cold evening, with more silence than words, he left. No shouting, no goodbye, just the sound of a door closing on 7 years of togetherness. Emma didn't cry that night. Not because she wasn't broken, but because the tears had nowhere to fall. They would have drowned her if she started. The next morning, she walked out to the same fields where she and Daniel once planned their future and started working. Alone. There were days she'd wake before sunrise to milk cows, sell eggs, and teach kids from nearby farms how to plant seedlings. Her degree never got framed. It stayed folded in a drawer with old love letters, bills piled up, and yet somehow she made them disappear. Neighbors whispered about how she was holding up. She smiled through it. Because what else do women like her do? She learned how to fix a tractor engine using YouTube tutorials, how to make soup out of scraps, how to make silence her closest friend. Then, 6 months after Daniel left, the nausea began. The dizziness, the exhaustion she blamed on stress. But the doctor's words changed everything. She was pregnant. She sat in her truck for hours afterward, staring at the test results like a bad joke told by fate. A child, his child, when he was probably somewhere signing his next big deal. For a while, she thought of calling him. Then she didn't. Because love wasn't about begging someone to stay. It was about knowing when to stop chasing someone who already left. So, Emma raised her son the same way she rebuilt her life, quietly, without witnesses. Every morning, she'd tie her hair up, whisper a prayer, and walk out to face another day. Her hands grew rougher. Her back ached more. But when her boy laughed, the whole world felt softer again. She named him Eli, short, for Elijah, a name that meant "my God is strength," and strength is what she became, while Daniel's face appeared in magazines under top entrepreneurs to watch. Emma's name never left that small-town post office mailing list. But she didn't mind, because what she had couldn't be measured in net worth. It was measured in bedtime stories, scraped knees and a little boy's laughter in the fields. Still, on quiet nights, when the wind hummed against the farmhouse windows, she wondered if Daniel ever thought about her, about them. Then she'd shake it off like dust from her boots and remind herself, you can't build love out of what's already left you. But destiny, cruel or kind, had its own plans. Because 7 years later, the man who once called her world too small would drive right back into it and find out just how much he'd missed. Daniel Hayes didn't grow rich overnight. He grew restless first. After leaving the farm, he moved to Chicago with a single suitcase, a laptop, and the conviction that he'd prove everyone wrong. He slept in a rented room above a pawn shop, ate ramen noodles for months, and built a trading startup that no one believed in, until it worked. Within 3 years, Daniel was shaking hands with investors who'd never looked twice at a man in muddy boots. He swapped the scent of soil for cologne, barns for boardrooms. Every new client, every zero added to his account, felt like another brick in the wall he built between who he was and who he used to be. But success doesn't silence guilt. It amplifies it in quieter rooms. He kept a framed photo of a sunrise on his office desk. His employees thought it was a stock image. It wasn't. It was the view from the farm porch he left behind. Still, Daniel told himself he did the right thing. That love was a luxury people like him couldn't afford, until the scandal hit. A partner he trusted, Marcus Reed, slick smile and even slicker lies, had been falsifying numbers in Daniel's company reports. Millions were missing. Overnight, Daniel's reputation became front-page chaos. Investors pulled out. Reporters waited outside his condo. He wasn't broke. Not yet. But the empire he'd bled for was collapsing fast. When his lawyer advised him to lay low for a few months, Daniel did something uncharacteristic. He left, no headlines, no entourage, just him, his car, and too many ghosts. The road took him west, toward silence, toward memory, toward the one place he promised never to return. Meanwhile, back on the farm, Emma was facing her own kind of storm. Her son, Eli, had started school that year, bright and curious like his father. But small towns aren't kind to stories they think they know. Some whispered that Daniel left because of her. Others pitied her for raising someone else's dream. She didn't care much for gossip, but one thing she couldn't ignore was the letter taped to her door one morning. Final notice. The farm, her father's land, was under risk of foreclosure. She'd been late on 2 payments after a brutal winter that killed her crops. The bank didn't care about weather or widowhood. It cared about numbers. That night, she sat at the table, bills spread out like battle plans. She'd spent 7 years surviving, but this was survival's crueler form, fighting not to lose the only thing that ever stayed. And yet, she didn't give up. Emma found an old idea she once drafted in college, a plan for sustainable soil enrichment using organic waste and micro-farming techniques. She reworked it, polished it, and sent it to a national agricultural grant program. The odds were impossible, but she'd been defying odds her whole life. 2 months later, Daniel was sitting in a downtown cafe staring at a news alert. Rural innovator from Pine Creek Farm, among finalists for National AgriVision Grant. He almost scrolled past it until the name hit him like a truck, Emma. Carter, his Emma. She wasn't just surviving, she was innovating, competing, rising. The same woman he once told, "You'll never make it big here." And she'd done exactly that. Daniel laughed, not out of joy, but disbelief. There she was, building something real, something honest, while he sat in a city apartment drowning in fake numbers. For the first time in years, he felt small again. And it felt right. He drove out the next morning. No plan, no speech. Just an ache that wouldn't quiet down. On his way, memories played in reverse. The laughter, the fights, the day he left without looking back. Every billboard he passed felt like a reminder of what ambition had cost him. But fate had one more twist to throw his way. Halfway to Pine Creek, Daniel stopped for gas and overheard 2 locals talking near the counter. "Shame what's happening to that Carter farm," one said. "Yeah," the other replied. "Bank's about to take it next month. She's got that little boy, too. Tough woman, though." Daniel's hand froze around his wallet. A little boy. For a second, he thought it was a coincidence. Then the math hit him. 7 years gone, a boy just about 6. His mind raced. His heart didn't. It fell. He didn't ask more questions. Just got in his car and drove faster. Meanwhile, Emma was getting ready for the visit from the grant evaluators. Her project could save everything. The farm, her son's future, her pride. But she also knew the odds weren't in her favor. The bank deadline loomed, and she was days away from losing it all. Still, she worked, because work was the only thing that ever kept her standing. And then, that afternoon, as she prepared to meet the evaluators, she saw a familiar car slow down at the gate. Her breath caught. That sleek black sedan didn't belong to anyone in Pine Creek. It stopped. The door opened, and out stepped the ghost she buried years ago, Daniel Hayes. He didn't know what he was doing, only that he had to see her. To say something. Anything. But when he saw her holding a clipboard, wearing that same determined look she had the day he left, words failed. She looked older, stronger, more beautiful than she ever did when she was his. He wanted to apologize. She wanted to turn away, but the universe didn't wait for either of them. Because just then, Eli came running from the barn, waving a paper airplane. Daniel froze. The same eyes. The same grin. Time stopped moving. That was the moment everything shifted, the discovery that cracked his world open. He wasn't just visiting his ex. He was meeting the proof that love had lived on without him. That night, Daniel sat in his car outside the farm, unable to leave. He watched the lights go out, one by one, and thought about the man he'd become. the man who traded meaning for money. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But one thing was clear. This wasn't about success anymore. It was about redemption, because the story of Daniel Hayes wasn't over when he became a millionaire. It was only just beginning, on the same soil where it all started to grow. The next morning felt like walking into a storm she had predicted. Ruth had been invisible for so long that no one noticed her now, carrying that folder, clutching truth like a secret weapon. The boardroom gleamed under cold lights, glass walls reflecting faces that had never seen her as anything more than the cleaning lady. She stood outside for a full minute, listening. The laughter, the self-congratulations, the talk of bonuses and stock options, while she had skipped dinners to buy her son's inhaler. "Excuse me," she said softly, stepping in. A dozen heads turned, irritation flashing. "This is a closed meeting," snapped the CFO, that same man who once scolded her for leaving streaks on a conference table. Ruth didn't move, didn't blink. "You might want to open it," she replied quietly. She placed a single folded napkin on the glossy table. The CFO frowned. "What's this?" "You're missing $4.2 million, she said. The silence that followed felt like an earthquake. At first, they thought she was joking. Then the CEO picked up the napkin, reading the hand-scribbled columns of figures, numbers that exposed months of manipulation. And the emails attached in her envelope with timestamps and audit trails. "You've got to be kidding me," one executive muttered. But Ruth's calm was unnerving. "I'm not. And I've sent copies to the IRS, the SEC, and Channel 7. The CFO went pale. The HR director gasped. The PR manager's pen dropped and rolled across the table. For the first time in her life, Ruth wasn't the one standing small. They were. "You realize what you've done?" The CFO barked, his voice trembling between fear and fury. "Yes," Ruth said. "I told the truth. Something this company stopped doing a long time ago." The CEO stood, trying to regain control. "Ruth, let's talk privately." But she cut him off. "You had years to talk. I just cleaned up your messes. Now it's your turn." The tension was electric, like the air before lightning hits. Every eye was on her. Every lie they'd built was cracking under the weight of her courage. The CFO lunged forward, snatching the napkin. "You'll regret this." Ruth smiled faintly. "I already did." For 7 years, security was called. But by then, the damage was done. The news alert was already buzzing on someone's phone. "Whistleblower exposes 4.2 meter fraud at Hawthorne Holdings." She turned to leave, her reflection catching in the glass, no longer the cleaner in the background, but the storm that swept the dirt away. As she reached the door, someone whispered, "That's her. That's the woman who did it." Ruth paused just long enough to look back. "I'll let myself out," she said, and walked away, head high, heart pounding. Outside, the winter sun was sharp and bright, cutting through gray clouds like justice itself. For once, the cold didn't bother her, because in that moment Ruth realized something deeper than revenge. She hadn't just exposed a fraud. She had reclaimed her own worth. That napkin wasn't proof of a crime. It was proof that even the smallest act of courage could shake empires. Her hands, once calloused from scrubbing, had rewritten a story no one would ever forget. And that day, the janitor became the most powerful person in the room. Narrator's reflection for YouTube voiceover tone. Sometimes, the world only hears you when you stop whispering. Ruth spent years cleaning up other people's dirt, until she realized some stains can only be removed by truth. The company tried to save face. Public apologies, desperate offers, even a 6-figure salary to keep her quiet. But she had already found something money couldn't buy: peace. She walked out of that glass building for the last time, the same way she'd walked in 100 times before. Except this time, the weight on her shoulders was gone. She used her whistleblower settlement to rent a small office downtown, a place with sunlight instead of fluorescent tubes, and the smell of coffee instead of cleaning supplies. On the door, she painted 3 words that still made her smile: Ruth Carter Consulting. She started small, helping small nonprofits balance their books, teaching them how to protect their integrity when big money came calling. But word spread fast. Soon, corporations that once ignored her were calling for advice. And she answered, not out of pride, but purpose. Because Ruth knew what it meant to be unseen, and she'd made a promise to herself. No one who came to her for help would ever feel invisible again. Her first hire was a single mother from her old neighborhood. Then another. Then another. She taught them the language of numbers, the power of precision, and the courage to question what doesn't add up. Every ledger tells a story, Ruth would say. You just have to be brave enough to read between the lines. Within 2 years, her small firm had contracts with Fortune 500 companies. Not because she chased profit, but because people trusted her name. And in a world built on lies, that trust was priceless. Her son, Michael, grew up watching her rebuild their lives. One spreadsheet, one truth, one heartbeat at a time. He never forgot the nights she fell asleep beside his hospital bed or worked by flashlight so she wouldn't wake him. Now he was in college, studying finance, top of his class, just like she once was. But this time, the dream didn't have to be put on a dusty shelf. On graduation day, when he walked across that stage, Ruth sat in the crowd, tears burning her eyes. The same hands that once scrubbed floors now held a camera, capturing a future she once thought she'd never see. After the ceremony, Michael hugged her tight and whispered, "You gave up everything for me," she smiled. "No, sweetheart. I built everything for you." Sometimes Ruth still walked past her old office building. She'd see the new executives through the glass, different faces, same polished lies. But she didn't feel bitterness anymore. Just clarity. She had learned that power isn't in titles or corner offices. It's in the courage to do what's right when no one's watching. At home, her kitchen table was now covered in things that mattered. Her son's textbooks, letters from women she'd mentored, and one framed napkin, the same one that started it all. Numbers still faded but readable. She kept it as a reminder that truth, even written in ink, doesn't fade. It echoes. On the 3rd anniversary of the whistleblower case, a local university invited her to speak. Standing at the podium, looking out at rows of students, she took a breath and said, "I used to think success was about climbing ladders. Now I know it's about building them for others." Applause filled the room. Not because she was famous, but because she was real. After the talk, a young woman approached her, nervous, hopeful. "Ms. Carter," she said, "I clean offices at night. I want to study accounting, but I can't afford it." Ruth smiled softly, recognizing the same hunger in that girl's eyes that once burned in her own. "Come by Monday," she said. "I'll teach you what I know, free of charge." The girl's eyes filled with tears. And in that moment, Ruth realized the cycle was complete. These days, she still wakes up early, still makes coffee the same way, but the silence in her house doesn't feel heavy anymore. It feels peaceful. Sometimes she sits by the window watching the sunrise, remembering the woman she used to be, invisible, exhausted, afraid to dream, and then she smiles because she isn't that woman anymore. Now, she runs her own company, raises other women up, and when she walks into rooms, people listen, not because of her title, but because of her truth. Narrator's closing voice, for YouTube ending tone. Ruth Carter once cleaned the offices of the powerful. Now she teaches the powerful what integrity means. She's no longer invisible. She's undeniable. Thanks for watching. If Ruth's story inspired you, hit like, share it with someone who needs courage today, and subscribe for more real stories that remind us, sometimes the strongest people are the ones no one saw coming.